I remember when I came back into the hobby a few years ago, I got swept up in the excitement of sending books off to a third-party grader to be graded so that I could unbox them on camera and show everybody the cool books that are in my collection. I got swept up in that emotion, and I'll be honest, I graded a lot of books that probably should not have been graded. And I will be the first to admit that not every comic has to be graded. And there are folks out there right now that are new to the hobby or newly returning that may be in the exact same place that I was a few years ago, thinking that everything has to be graded, that the only way to have a great collection is to have a bunch of graded books. And I will be the first to admit that that is false. That is not true. You can have an amazing collection and keep your books raw. You could also have an amazing collection that is a combination of raw and graded books. At the end of the day, it's your collection and you get to decide what your collection is actually comprised of. But to that point, what I want to do in this video is to give you 5 reasons why you may want to keep your collection raw. Stay tuned. It honestly doesn't matter whether you like raw comics or graded comics. There is a little something for everyone over at Hip Comic. This is actually a platform that has more than 1 million comics available for your perusal, and that includes raw and graded comics. This is a website that is built by collectors for collectors, and I encourage you to check them out today after you watch this video using the link down in the description. Reggie here, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. As I mentioned, back at the end of 2017, the beginning of 2018, and possibly into 2019, I slabbed everything. If there was a comic in my collection that I was excited about because I had some personal attachment to it, or if it had some value, I was sending that book in to be graded. And I can tell you for a fact that I wasted a lot of money. I graded a lot of comics unnecessarily because I got swept up in this idea that everything had to be graded. And over time, what I've come to realize is that that isn't true. And that's part of the reason why I've created a ton of videos that help people to think through whether it makes sense to grade a comic or not. And again, if you have some sentimental attachment to something, or if you have just a desire to grade it, go ahead and do it. But the truth of the matter is that you can have an amazing collection that is comprised of raw books. Getting books graded is not a necessity. It makes it easier in some respects, but in other respects, it has some major downsides. But as I mentioned in this video, I want to talk about why having a raw collection could be best. And one of the very first things that I have to mention is cost. It doesn't matter which grading company you use because they're all expensive. And what I mean by that is that if you believe you have to send your comic off to a third-party grader in order to truly protect and preserve it, I'm going to tell you that that's not necessarily true. I don't know how long poly bags have been around, but let's just say they've been around for a long period of time and they are more than adequate to actually protect and preserve your comic. And yes, there are some things that you have to do environmentally to make sure that you're getting the most benefit from that bag and board, but bags and boards, poly bags are great. They work incredibly well. As long as you're getting acid-free backing boards, you should be fine. Sometimes you have to change them out every few years. You may have to rotate the books. You may have to keep them in a cool, dark place, but poly bags are perfectly fine. They are also the cheapest way to protect and preserve your comics. And like I said, they've been around for a long time, long before grading was ever something that was done with a comic book. If you feel that you want to get fancy with it, you want to keep it inexpensive, but you want to get fancy, you want to be able to show off your books because you have awesome books. Again, you don't have to send them to be graded. What you can do is you can put them in a Mylar bag. And Mylar bags come in different thicknesses from 2 mil to 4 mil, and each one of them has its pros and cons. But I will tell you that going to a Mylar will give you a better presentation for any comic that you have in your collection. If you go from a polybag to a Mylar, trust me when I tell you that comic will look a whole lot better. And part of the reason for that is how the polybag is manufactured versus the Mylar. The Mylar is a much harder type of material, less of a sheen and more of a shine. And that's part of the reason why books look so much better in a Mylar. If you want to truly get fancy with it, you can actually use some clear backing boards. And that way you can see both the front and the back side of your comic, because now you have a clear backing board inside of a Mylar. Again, an inexpensive way to go versus that of grading. A little bit more money than a polybag, but you also have better presentation for display purposes. The third and potentially one of the more important things about not grading your comics is that you don't have to let your comics go. And I can tell you for a fact that there are a lot of people that really struggle with this point of letting go of something that they may have had in their possession for decades. When you have to bundle up your comics and put them in the mail and send them off and then wait for them to come back, that is a tough thing. And I too struggle with that. I struggled with it in the beginning because I've had books in my collection since the 90s that technically have never been out of my possession or that of my parents in all that time. And to put it in the mail and send them off and then wait months for them to actually come back in the mail, that is a daunting thing. You get used to it, but my point here is that by keeping your books raw, you do not have to experience that. You do not have to give up control of your books. You can keep them in your possession, and as I mentioned, keep them in polybags and Mylars and clear backing boards and all of that kind of stuff. The fourth point that I want to make here about keeping your collection raw is that you have an opportunity to read it. Comics are meant to be read and enjoyed. And yes, I have a room full of graded comics, but I have a larger collection of raw books that will probably never be graded. And I can tell you for a fact that there is nothing like opening up a polybag and flipping through and reading a comic. There is nothing like that tactile experience and the smell that comes with comics. You cannot get that from a comic that has been encapsulated, and you certainly don't get it with a digital comic. And yes, I do read digitally, but again, there's nothing like flipping through a comic and turning the pages and just reading and enjoying the story and the art. So again, a huge part of keeping your comics raw, you get to read them. I don't know about you, but there is something about opening up a bin of comics and seeing them all uniform, seeing them all in the same size, bag and board, having everything organized. There is nothing like that. And that is a little bit of a challenge when you have a mixture of raw books and graded books, and some of your graded books are graded by one company or graded at a different period of time when they had a different case versus the case that they have now. My point is that by keeping your books raw, you can have uniformity. You can have all of the organization that you want inside of your bins where everything lines up and everything looks perfect. And honestly, I wish more of my collection actually looked like that. But for those folks out there that have OCD or tendencies towards OCD, raw is not a bad way to go because uniformity is right in your future. With that said, I want to wrap this video up. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch. Again, this was just a few thoughts as to why keeping your collection raw is not a bad way to go. Do not feel the pressure of spending more money on comics that you already have to get them encapsulated if that's not what you want to do. It's your collection. You get to decide. But to that point, I'm hoping that you will decide to go ahead and tap the subscribe button and turn on notifications so that you don't miss out on any of the content that comes out from my channel. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do that on Instagram, and be certain to check out the sponsor of this video, Hip Comic, using the link down in the description.